Hello and welcome back to our final session of the day. I am Kelly Hill, Executive Editor of RCR Wireless News, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Bargs Srivatsan, who is a partner with McKinsey & Company. She is going to be giving us some good perspective today on delivering new services at the edge. Folks, if you have questions, please go ahead and submit them through the user interface, and we'll leave a few minutes for those at the end. Bargs, please go ahead.
Okay. Very nice to meet all of you. I think we are talking about a super exciting topic that's very timely. We do have a lot of our clients thinking about this as well. Let me begin with a short tangent, if you will, right? A few years ago, we were all debating if and why enterprises should move any of their workloads to public cloud. And then lo and behold, a few years down the line now, enterprises are enthusiastically moving a lot of their workloads to public cloud, as witnessed by a lot of the earnings reports that you're seeing from the hyperscalers. But then what's also happening is they're also realizing that certain workloads will always remain either near or on premises, given many, many reasons, right? One of the reasons being low latency requirements, reliable connectivity, privacy regulations, security considerations, and so on. So we are seeing enterprises go from a cloud-first approach to a cloud-smart approach, where they're starting to think about, now for each workload, what is the right configuration that I really need to put that in? Is that going to be sitting on the edge, if you will, or is it public cloud, or is it a combination of the two, and so on? That's kind of what's spurring a lot of the work around edge for us. And as you can go to the next page, Jeff. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we are seeing a massive uptick in interest in edge. The adoption is still a little behind. This remains a very supply-driven market rather than end consumer-driven market right now. And it's a variety of ecosystem players are making investments. For example, we are seeing hyperscalers go at this in a very big way. I mean, all big three of them and some of the tier 2 ones as well. We are seeing telco providers really double down and up their infrastructure, update their infrastructure and so on, and come back with, how would I say, very revised strategy on how they can really capitalize with 5G and edge and so on. We're also seeing a lot of SaaS solution providers really double down. Again, we're also seeing system integrators also do massive investments here. Accenture almost as an entire practice around edge, if you will. And the other quick point I'll make, and then we should go to the market sizing, is hardware is becoming sexy again, right? With the cloud, the pendulum swing towards hardware becoming heavily commoditized and being shared. With edge, there's a little bit of a control point around hardware also emerging. Players like Workada, who are manufacturing their own hardware, are also embedding some amount of software capabilities into the hardware, are becoming very, very prominent and kind of driving the entire decision-making around the stack for some of the customers. Now, if you look at the market size, it's fairly small today, but we do see this becoming significant over the next 3-4 years. And by 2025, we do think that it's going to become almost comparable to what the public cloud market looks like today. And the fastest adoption is happening in manufacturing and retail across many, many use cases. You can see an entire list that we have shared. We are seeing, for example, manufacturers do a lot of their work on the premise edge. I'll explain what that means around, looking at in-between interim goods as well as finished goods through video inspection and removing some of the defective parts, if you will. And that's saving them millions and millions of dollars, and obviously quality issues that down the road as well. Now, switching gears a little bit, right? So if we start taking a look at where is the market really today, we are seeing some amount of implementations. But before we go there, let me share a couple of definitions to ground us. So when I talk through the examples, you can understand, where the implementations are actually sitting. We are seeing two types of edges happening. One is the operator edge or the multi-access edge compute, which is where public or private computing and storage resources are deployed at the edge of a mobile or converged services provider's network. It's typically one network hop away from the enterprise premises. So these are typically your central offices of the telco, like aggregation points on the telco provider's network, for example. The second type of edge we see, which is where we see most of the implementations today, is premise edge or on-premise edge, which is compute and storage resources are deployed within the premise, a remote or a mobile location where data is actually being generated, and the compute and storage resources are sitting very, very close to where the data being generated is getting processed as well. So this could be your retail bank branch, a retail store, a restaurant, or a manufacturing plant, etc. And we are seeing a lot more of this, by the way, today. And we are hoping that there'll be a big shift towards MEC happening over the course of time in the next 2-3 years, because obviously, with AWS wavelength zones, Azure stack edge zones, and many other such deployments, we are seeing a ramp up of capacity being built up, but the adoption is slightly lagging the capacity deployment right now. Let me go to the next page and touch on a couple of examples. So the first example is all about colonoscopy. I know it doesn't sound very sexy, but it's a fairly tedious process, and doctors really require precision to be able to do this. The typical miss rate of detecting polyps during a colonoscopy is about 20%, which is very high. So the business problem that this provider was trying to solve for was improve the quality of care by increasing the accuracy of polyp detection and making sure that there is less risk to patient health. They also really wanted to get this right every single time without having to need a ton of expertise, right? The AI assistance was being used to speed up the procedure as well. One, to do more of the procedure, do it with more precision, and also make sure that the need for expertise is not as much, so it kind of reduces the burden on the physicians. As a result of deploying such a solution, they were able to get the polyp detection accuracy or the miss rate from 20% miss rate to 5%, which was significant. They were also able to improve the revenue generated from such a procedure by 10% because of the rapid reduction in time. They were able to increase the number of procedures that were getting done. Now, the MEC solution, this was an MEC deployment, and it was done by a software provider, a SaaS provider in partnership with AWS. And this solution provided the necessary latency levels that you cannot consistently achieve with public cloud today. And also made sure that you're not deploying the compute and storage at every single hospital location or every single location that the colonoscopy is being conducted, but more in a central location that can then serve 4 or 5 hospital locations, or they call them the ASCs, right? The surgical centers, the ambulatory surgical centers. Multiple of them can come in and make use of this one single MEC deployment. Now, there's a big question about ROI from edge. In this case, the AI-assisted colonoscopy use cases, just that use case alone, was expected to deliver positive ROI within just the first year itself, which is very significant for what an edge deployment typically does. In the second example, which is more of the premise edge that I was talking about, it's a quick service restaurant chain that deployed IoT at scale, and they're now deploying edge computing solutions to offer personalized recommendations to customers. They were trying to solve the problem of where they were really trying to upsell and cross-sell products to their customers, and they were initially relying a lot on their store associates to come in and do that. Now, what that meant was the store associate had to put in thinking and kind of do it on the fly. They really need to check what's in stock in the store as well. So there was a lot of manual thinking and processing going on. And the customers kind of expected not just-in-time recommendations, but also personalized experience as well. Now, with Edge, they were able to do a few use cases. I'll touch on one of them in more detail. The first one was about personalized recommendations. They were able to use AI/ML-enabled recommendation system to suggest product choices to the customers. There was also order sequencing because they were getting orders from the in-store POS, the drive-through POS, as well as the mobile orders coming in. They were able to kind of put some intelligence into this to do the right sequencing just in time. And there was also speech-to-text order placement, the voice order recognition that was in there with the POS integration. So all this was enabled with a lot more accuracy and much less latency, thanks to their premise edge implementation. They were also thinking about deploying automated inventory replenishment use case down the line, which would track currently available inventory through sensors, match the data with actual and forecasted sales, and replenish stock almost on a daily basis. Now, the way the very first use case that I talked about, the personalized recommendation engine worked out was like this. The customer would have the application installed. It could be a Starbucks application, it could be your Chipotle application on your phone. And as you enter the drive-through, a Cisco Bluetooth beacon recognizes the customer. There is enough amount of customer data stored in the store, and if needed, they also pull occasional data from the cloud. But this was more about serving some of their frequent customers as well as some of the local customers, so the data was stored locally. So a local AI/ML model would provide recommendations on products based on customers' profile, their preferences, their past purchase data, and so on, and some amount of external data as well, because you had to kind of think through what's happening from a seasonality perspective. Now, these recommendations would then flow through an Oracle POS system that would filter the recommendations based on what's available inside the store, so the local inventory. And the customer would then see very personalized recommendations on the digital signage as they're getting ready to place their orders. Now, as a result of this deployment, the QSR chain was able to see about 5 to 20% increase in revenue per store as a result. And the ROI on this specific deployment was 5x plus, as you can see on the slide. So it's significantly higher than what we talked about in the first case. Now, the challenge with Edge most of the time is, I'll go into more details, but it's all about getting the ROI right and getting the path to the ROI right. Sometimes the ROI can happen in a year, sometimes it may take 3 years, sometimes it may take 5 years. And also there needs to be a significant number of deployments that need to happen to kind of bolster your ROI, right? And when I say significant number of deployments, it could be across multiple different locations, but it could also be multiple different use cases, because once you build this digital foundation, connecting the different data silos together and you get all your digital connections done, the number of use cases that you need to deploy can become much easier, right? You get the ROI, somewhat of a decent ROI with the first 1 or 2 use cases, but then the effort to do 3 and 4 become much lesser for the ROI that can deliver. So the ROI, so if the expense line goes like this, the ROI line comes in like this. Right? It starts small, but then it goes up very quickly. Now, I can go into one more additional case example. Let me just take a quick look at time. I think on the next page, we have a couple more examples. There is a luxury retailer who's trying to solve a very specific problem that they have. They have these pop-up events that can be anywhere from like a 2-day event to a 15-day event. And these locations obviously differ from one event to another. So they really needed connectivity wherever they were putting up this event, connectivity plus physical infrastructure to kind of have the compute and storage where it's needed. Initially, the way they were doing it was kind of having a contract for each event, a year-long contract for each event for the local connectivity provider, and they would have to move the physical infrastructure from one event to another. This was obviously not very effective and also not very efficient from a cost perspective. They also needed additional cost to install fibers wherever there were remote areas as well. Now, post going the Edge route, all connectivity at all events was supplied by MEC for one contract. The staff can access company resources and POS on any of their mobile devices. And the remote locations became very serviceable through 5G connectivity WAN rental for much lesser than what they were paying for a event setup before. Now, they are thinking about doing a few more use cases, but this also solved a different problem for them, right? Initially, when they were doing a lot of these pop-up events, they needed to have their products in all sorts of SKUs so the customer can come in, try a different color on, different size on, and so on. But now with Edge, what they're able to do is have these smart mirrors where they can create an avatar of you and they can just put the products on you, superimpose. So the inventory carrying costs also drop down significantly for them. They're obviously thinking about the metaverse as the next step, but again, Edge will probably cover that for them as well. I'll actually skip example 4 and probably go to the next slide. Oh, I think I see a question, Stephanie. Maybe I can take that very quickly. Maybe I'll touch on the stack and come back to the question. From a stack perspective, I think you're seeing one example stack here. The problem with the Edge stack is twofold. One is it's not going to look like this for all the use cases. It's also not going to look like this for many of the, even for the same use case that's deployed by 2 different customers. Because for Edge, the biggest challenge is you really need to integrate with your existing technology landscape. So we see a lot of brownfield integration happening, which is why SIs have a really significant role to play here. The other thing to call out in this Edge stack is, even if the stack look very similar for, let's say, another customer that's trying to do something very similar, the spend may look very, very different, right? And spend, for example, in Edge infra security, you're seeing significant amount of spend, and you're also seeing good amount of spend on both connectivity and the devices. This is because in this specific case, they had to deploy a lot of new Edge devices, wire the Edge device and provide connectivity to the premises and so on. So those 2 spend areas became pretty significant. And given the context that this was more of a health monitoring system, there was increased need for security and privacy. So obviously the Edge infra-security spend also looks pretty big. This is to just ground you that, many, many different layers need to come together. Sometimes if in a single layer, we also see multiple different providers coming in and attacking the problem from different angles. So all I'm trying to say is super complicated stack and very, very non-trivial way of thinking about it, right? Which is why you're not seeing a ton of adoption from an Edge perspective yet. Let me take the question and then dive into the challenges after. So do you see gaps in the ecosystem and or delivery of MEC services to enterprises? If so, can you explain what these are? we see significant amount of gaps, right? And the problem that we see is, given how complicated the edge stack is and how many number of providers really need to come together, one big opportunity that we see for MEC services, and some of this I think the telcos are also thinking about, is there one provider that can play the role of prime vendor who can pull together the rest of the stack together and say, hey, if you want to do real-time promotions in a retail store, I have this ready-made stack to deploy. They don't need to provide all the components themselves, but they are the ones kind of playing the anchor vendor role and integrating all the different components together to offer that solution stack. The second thing I think where there's a bit of a gap, this is more from business perspective, right, is the ROI equation that I was talking about, right? So many business decision makers definitely see the value of edge. Where they lose the plot is, okay, how much do I really need to invest? And when is this ROI going to pan out for me? And what's the path to this at scale ROI? Having a very clear ROI calculator as part of your sales, toolkit is probably going to be very helpful, right? Even showing examples to say, hey, this is what we did for another manufacturing player, for example, or a retailer, for example. And this is kind of how they, scaled up the implementation to get the ROI that they really achieved at the end of, let's say, 2 years, 3 years. That kind of picture is very important for, I think, whoever is playing the prime vendor role to play that role. Maybe I should just go to the next slide if that's okay. So this is one that kind of alludes to the example that I was just talking about, where the stadium wanted to do a solution where they were going to deploy an edge use case to make sure that, there's this compliance with COVID and social distancing protocols inside the stadium and ensure a very smooth check-in process for the fans who are coming into the stadium. They, what they did was they deployed an end-to-end video analytics solution directly from a telco that eased the complexity for the customer, created significant value for themselves as well, because they played the prime vendor role, pulled the stack together. They were still doing mainly connectivity, but they were also taking responsibility for integrating the stack, deploying the stack, as well as then maintaining the solution for the stadium. And in doing this, you typically see 10 to 15% of value capture from a connectivity and gateway perspective, but you will see it's 25 here because the telco went above and beyond their traditional role and tried to do much more of a up the stack role for this in this case. Okay, maybe next slide. So again, edge is an opportunity that's yet to come and yet to scale only because of the significant number of challenges that we are seeing. And cloud was very similar 5 to 7 years ago, right? Hopefully all of this will get solved. The complexity of the stack, we cannot emphasize that enough, right? That's where I think it's really getting difficult. If you take many of the typical players that come in and solve a lot of your technical issues, hyperscalers, for example, they are not interested in solving the last mile customization for the customer, which is required in the case of edge, right? Let's say you're doing asset management in the manufacturing facility. Now, asset can mean very different assets in very different manufacturing contexts. Even within the same factory, there can be different kinds of assets, different data formats. So there is no one way to kind of solve this problem. So a lot of the platform providers are significantly focused on providing horizontal solutions. So I think the unlock is going to come from some of the ecosystem players who are going to go and start stitching these end-to-end stacks together and also doing the last mile customization for the customer. So that's number one challenge, right? And I'll touch on the last column that you see here, which is also in customers really want to build once and deploy everywhere. They want to be able to bring some of the cloud stack much closer to where the edge workloads are being run. Hyperscalers are actively solving it. And there's also integration needs with existing technology landscape, as I referred to in the beginning. So brownfield integration needs to happen. And each site is also very different from another, right? So if you develop let's say a blueprint for one manufacturing location or a factory, it need not really translate assets to all of the different factories because the other factory may have a different level of legacy technology deployed. It may have a very different layout. It may have a very different location for some of the assets and so on. So the problems get complicated as you start scaling as well, not just with the stack itself, but also scaling the deployment. And I think a lot of this we already talked about, right? And the need for technical talent that can really understand the full stack is very important from an edge perspective. I mean, cloud is still fighting the talent battle a little bit. Edge is going to fight it even more. And in many cases, what we are seeing is the existing devices that are in the landscape only go so far. So most customers really need to go and deploy new infrastructure, whether it's the sensors or small devices or the big devices. So there's obviously lack of available capacity and budget to do that as well. I think that kind of summarizes our presentation for today. Thank you for listening, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions.
Barks, thank you so much for giving us that rundown on Edge and some really interesting use cases that are going on that are real today and hopefully ready to scale tomorrow. All right, thank you all so much for joining this session. Please return to the main agenda and we'll have our chair's closing remarks.